Okay, so where we left off was chapter 280 actually, but there's a flow here. Let me just give a flow summary, okay? Because of so many details, you can get caught up in the details and forget lose the forest for the trees. So let's get to the forest a minute here. The general gist of the whole Hemshech where we are is obviously the interface of how the Yesh of Elam Hazeh, the ego and the self-absorbed existence that we live in, becomes somewhat of becomes sublimated through a bridge, through the interface to the divine. So bittul is the key word, but bittul means not annihilation of the self. It means the education of the self, the training, the discipline, harnessing. That's in simple English what the Rabbi is trying to achieve here. So to do so, there's the whole discussion of what is the interface. That goes back many Maimorim back. And it came down to pinpoint it, it's of course Keter, because that's what it says in Eitz Chaim. Keter is, and that's the whole theme of the Hemshech. It starts right at the beginning. The beginning of the Hemshech is all about Keter. The crown is that interface. But as he explained there, in the Keter itself, it's the Chachma Sheba Keter, which is called Chachma Stima, the hidden Chachma. Why is it Chachma Stima? Because Chachma has already the beginnings of our existence. It's a structure, or what we would call the world of reason, or the logic of existence. But it's Chachma Stima, so it's completely still on an unconscious level. But it's already the beginning of the interface. Chachma Stima, unconscious mind, will become the root of the conscious mind, and that becomes our tool, meaning our Chachma, all the way Chachma Nasiyah. Remember, we're talking everything Chachma D'Atzilus, but ultimately it means Chachma is the beginning of all Chachma. That our Chachma becomes our tool, our instrument, both the divine instrument to bring Elokus into our existence, into existence like ours, and our tool to return, to retrace the steps. In understanding Chachma and how Chachma affects the Midas and existence, the whole discussion of Teyu and Tikkun. To appreciate about relationships, a true relationship of two entities that are opposites. So he explains, of course, the contrast is a relationship that doesn't work. In Teyu, there's no relationship. It's a wild and chaotic world, very intense. If you live in the world of Teyu, you would have no relationships. The intensity would overwhelm. As he said, doesn't tolerate anything. The kalim on the container level, they don't cooperate with each other. All not because of because they're bad energy. It's because they're intense and they're undisciplined. And as he puts it, they're not mechuven, they're not aligned to the kavanah of the energy. They don't sense what the purpose is. So they're just like energies put, like entities that put into a room and have no clue really why they're here. In Atzilus and Tikkun, this is repaired because in Tikkun both the Eris are diminished and therefore not so intense, so they can tolerate each other, and the Kalim are able to cooperate with each other to the point of symbiosis, to the point of unity, which comes from the power of Atzmus, the ability for harmony within diversity. Now, that was the whole discussion. To understand that, he went into the whole Shema, the Shem Sag, was really to understand the distinction between Teyu and Tikkun, its root, Alpi Kabbalah, and Eitz Chaim. And basically the point is that in order to have this effect, this type of bittul, this type of unity, this type of harmony, requires the etzem of Shema. The etzem of Shema creates the unity, the harmony within the Kalim, and the reflection of Shema creates this unity among the Eidos. That was the end of that so-called subsection. Now to understand that well, began the whole section of Eid and Keli, which really is leading into, as we'll see, ultimately what the Rabbi is doing, he's going like into a microscopic view of what is really happening. What's wrong in Teyu? What's going on in Teyu? We know generally what's going on. But what really happened there that causes Shviras HaKelim? Because we understand this intensity, we understand this intolerance, we understand the intolerance, there's no harmony, and Tikkun, everything is repaired. But what is really going on? So there's something with the Eris and Kelim that don't speak to each other. So to understand it well, he dissects the nature and personality of Eir, and the nature and personality of Keli. And then, of course, you'll understand their interaction. You'll understand he's going to go into mamish detail of all the different ways they can't work, they could not work together, and then, of course, the ways that they could work together. Which real practically comes down to, it's nice to say, let's have harmony instead of chaos, but when it comes down to a blueprint for our lives, how? So the details of Eid and Keli are critical because they're really how two things work together. But to understand it well, you have to understand all the different details. So generally speaking, what we reviewed last time was that there are three elements in Eid. Eid in general is bittul, Ayin. Keli in general is yesh. That's the first rule. In Ayin itself, there's three levels. And they're all relevant because you'll see each level later is how they interact with the Keli. Which part of the Ayin and Eid is critical how it will interact with the yesh. So that's why these details are not just a nice understanding of Eid. It's going to ultimately lead to understand how its relationship with Keli is, whereas more or less what you're up to here. So the three, just to sum up, what are the three things in Ayin? The three things in Ayin is, okay, remember, the Eid by nature is Ayin because it's davuk, it's connected to its source. It knows it's a reflection of its source. It's not yesh. A yesh means it's about me. I'm not reflecting someone else. I'm not representing anyone else. You know? Like he says, I'm not in management, I'm in sales. Right? I'm not reflecting anyone else. I'm taking care of myself. Ayin is right away means that it's reflecting something. What is it? The source. Whether it's in the shemesh, in the mashal, or in the nimshal, but that's the source. In that itself, he broke it into three parts. And three levels of bittul, actually. One is ayin, simply that the light, the energy, is similar to the source, me'ein hamoed, which means just like the source is not the yesh and not about itself, it's a higher entity. So the oir is me'ein, similar to its source. The second is that the ayin, the oir, feels its source. It's margish its source. This he calls already ein zolascha. Therefore, it feels that I'm nothing, that there's nothing but the source. But it's still not the third level, which is the third level is how the Eid wants to and strives to enter and return to the source. And is not interested in being outside of the source. And that is what he calls initially Efes Biltecha. It's a level of Efes. What does Efes mean? Because as he says a little later, is because it doesn't want to have anything of its own. It wants to be completely inside the source. Basically, these three levels, he says, is the Eid, how it's in the Keli, is Me'ein HaMoed, similar to the source. The Eid that's higher than the Slapshas B'Kelim, Chach Bina, is within the Kelim, is the first level. Chachme is higher than the Kelim, but it's still, the Fiyarach is still relative to them. That's Ein Zolascha, that it feels there's nothing but the source. And the third level is Keter. And in Keter itself, there's really two interpretations here. Initially, he explains it, which he calls later Pirush Rishon, Pirush Aleph. Ucham Hu, Kadamilos Sa'ilas, that it's Keser. So the first level is Bina, the second is Chachma, the third bittul is Keser. Remember, all three levels in Ayin and Eid. And Keser, as he explains, is Ucham Hu, even though it's a very powerful energy, but Ucham, it's dark and completely overshadowed by its source. Why? Because it wants to be part of the essence. And therefore, it, as he says with the Srofim, where you want to be, that's where you are. So it becomes what he calls his skalus. I was looking, the Frierdiker Rebbe actually, when he summarizes this Maimon, he says, Beis min his skalus. He doesn't even talk about Eir and Ayin. He talks actually about these two interpretations in Keser. Beis min his skalus, he calls it. Because we'll say that in a moment. So that's Ukumhu. So then, if that's the case, what we have is Ayin. Bina is the, let's call it the Yesh and the Ayin, or whatever. Bina is the lowest level of the Eir. There's the level of Ein Zolascha, nothing else but you is Chachma. And Keser senses that there's Efes Biltecha, that's completely nothing else.
It's based in Yonim Behiskal.
Right. Yeah.
It's another way.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Now, that's that. Okay, fine. But then he says, but Keser still is a level, you can't call Keser complete nothingness. Because the language in the Zohar is that it is a oil, it is energy. So you can't call Lav Nehurin, it has no light at all. So he goes into another, he breaks this down further, that there's two levels in that itself. So meaning really introducing a fourth level. That there's Primis of Keser, Primis of Keser is complete Ephes, Atik removed, and then there's the Chitzenius Keser. And he explains it with the marshal, with the bittul of Sharge B'tira, the flame in the sun. The flame in the sun, that is Sharge B'tira, Maya Hana. What is a flame in the sun? A flame has no value, and on the contrary, it darkens the spot that in the middle of the day. So this doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It exists. There's a light. There's an energy, but it's dark compared to its source. Like a student who's completely bittul, a wise person is bittul to, is completely subjugated to a greater teacher. Snapshot is not a chacham, but in the face, in the presence of his teacher, he's not there. And if anything, if he would open his mouth, anything would actually be like darkening the situation, so to speak. That's Keser. That's Chitzenius Keser. And Primis Keser is complete bittul. So basically, he's calling the first one, he wants to be scholarless. They're both looking to go back to the source. That's the third level. That's the base meaning. But one doesn't actually go into the source. It still remains an entity. But in face of its source, it senses the source, and therefore it has complete bittul, ukum. It feels completely dark. Whereas the Primis Keser actually goes into the source, and there it doesn't exist as an energy altogether. And he goes back and forth with these two things, and that's the two elements. This is what I just said is chapter 281. And then he says like this, okay, if that's the case, so really then it changes a little one thing. He says, Ein Zulascha becomes the third level, and Efes Voltecha is the fourth level now. He says that also. So this is the difference between Reshit Lo Yisyada, there's completely nothing, no awareness at all of self, and Keser Ukum, there's a self, but the self is completely dark compared to the source. When the source is not there, its presence is, that light is still there. Whereas in the Primis Keser, there's nothing there without the source. That's the end of.
The Ain's Lust will be now two levels. Will be Chitzenius Keser and
chapter 280. I'm sorry, that was not 281. That was chapter 280. What?
Ain's Lust will be two levels now, according to the second third.
Yeah. He lifts everything up a bit. So.
But still, the first one, like.
Look, they're all ayin. Everything is ayin. Okay, so now, so this is chapter 280. In 281, what he does is he goes and says that these two levels, by the way, on top of page, if someone wants to do a little research, I can't find it. Here, on top of page 568, Tavkuf Samaches, he says something is I look there, I can't find this thing that he says here. So, if you guys want to look it up, try it out. I'm not sure what he means. I went back and forth. Because the next parak, he also starts in the Likutei Torah Ba'bir de Bimona, Shem Harav Amagi, that does say there. But the first one, where he talks about the difference between Dveikus and the scholarless, I can't find it. Here, Yassi, you want to do a little research? He says the bittul Ba'bir de Bimona. I can't find this thing that he says on top line here. I looked back and forth, I looked at it 10 times maybe, but I don't know, I'm not sure what he means. But okay, so chapter 281, he explains that the difference in Keser and Chachma is that Keser feels and senses how distant the divine is. And Chachma feels how there's nothing but the divine. And that's Efes Voltecha, Keser, that is. So, nevertheless, all this is still not the high level of Lo Yoda, which is the Primis Keser, and because there's absolutely no power, no energy at all.
Is that Efes?
Huh? That's Efes. That's what he says. If you look at the top, in the middle of the beginning of Tavkuf Samach Tes, we're talking about chapter 281 now. He says, Im kein zeh beza b'chinas ayin ve'efes da bittul de ukum b'chinas ayin da shezel ma'ala ma bittul de chachma va bittul de lo yada b'chinas efes mamash. Lines, you see that? Like 12 lines from the top. Yeah, I should have added at the end of chapter 280 was also a very important point that even though it's shagu b'tira, the flame, but because it's not from the same uhus, The bittul is deeper. So you could have your scholars, you can be completely join your source, but if you're from the same personality type, so the bittul may be stronger, but it's on a lower level. The bittul, however, is much higher when something is completely affected by something completely separate from its personality. In the case of Shari Betira, or in the case of Keter, realizing the source, right? So Chochmah may have more bittul agabe Keter in a way, but it's in the same muhus. And Keter is not different muhus at all, altogether. Now, then he goes back. This is critical. He goes back in chapter 281. He says, here's back to Pirush Rishon. All this, basically, this last 2 pages, the middle of 280 and the middle of 281, was the deeper interpretation. That Ukam, at the end of the day, Keser, at least Chesed is outside of Keser, is you can't call it completely ephes. Only primisicus. So now he goes back and says that what did we said before? But Eifana Aleph, you see, he says, but Eifana Aleph, but Pirush Ukam, that he wants to be lichol, he desires to become encompassed in the source in Ein Sei Baruch Hu. Yeshleim gam ken bezeh beis madregas bittul. So if you really break it down, it's really 5 levels. It's being the Eir in the Kalim, which is similar to the source. It's Chochmah, which feels the source, and therefore feels there's nothing else but the source. It's Keser, that is Ephes, but now in Keser itself, there's 2 levels. Ukam, and which is only Ayin compared to the other one, which is completely one. And now he's saying in Ukam itself, there's also both. So you really have 3 in Keser, Chachma Bina, if you want to really break it down. In other words, Primis Keser, 2 levels of bittul in Chetzenis Keser, 1 in Chachma, 1 in Bina. If it's it doesn't say it as 5 levels, but at the end of the day, if you really break it, it is 5. So what are these 2 types of bittul? So he says the difference is why there's iskalos. Remember, in the first level of Ayin, there's no iskalos. The first level of Ayin is primarily, the truth is they all have all each other, but the first level of Ayin is essentially, it's similar to the source. That's all it has. Let's not make that nothing, because that's already higher than a yesh. So the point is that in case you think you're bittul already, there's another 4 levels to go. Just begins the process. Most of us are still deeper than Kalim, the Asiyah, and Chumris. So it's so this is a whole different level. But in the levels of Ayin itself, the low level just is similar to the source. The second level of Ayin feels the source. The third level wants to be part of the source, wants to return to it. And that itself, he says, now there are 2 reasons. Why does the Eir want to go into the source? So this is what I'm being medayik here. 1, there's a difference in the reason for the aliyah in this cause. The reason, a difference of how the energy, the Eir, elevates, ascends, and wants to become encompassed in the source. There's 2 different reasons. Is it because, or if it's because the Eir on its own doesn't have this yashvus, it feels restless, doesn't feel at peace. Why? Because Eir by nature is not a yesh. It doesn't have a self. So what's it doing outside of the makir? It doesn't feel comfortable. Eir is just a reflection of the source. What's it doing here? So the Eir is restless in its own place, as opposed to yesh that isn't, basically. And this restlessness, there's no makom mitzvah. They have no place. So it's here because there's the shemesh sent the Eir, or the moyer sent the source sent the Eir to go radiate, but it doesn't feel that it belongs here. So therefore it's restless, and that's what causes it to want to return. That's like the srafim emdim mamale, that they want to be back there. Oi, and here's the second reason, which is going to be the deeper reason. Or it's not because it feels restless, because it's an atzmi. The Eir be'etzem is the source. It doesn't have anything of its own. Not only because it doesn't feel comfortable, it doesn't belong there. The first level, it feels that it doesn't belong where it is. And the second one, the Eir Be'etzem is not in existence outside of the Ma'ir. It's a deeper direct. He doesn't explain it right here, but then he goes on to explain the difference. What would be the difference? By Inyan Hu, and this is the end of this chapter, Pereish Be'alef, I'm just summing it up. The difference is, now it's Ein Zelaschcha Ve'evas Biltecha in Chetzenius Keser Gufa. So remember, before, there was Bina, Chochm is Ein Zelaschcha, and Keser is Efes Biltecha. Then in the second interpretation, it was the previous Keser is Efes Biltecha, Chetzenius Keser is Ein Zelaschcha. Now in Chetzenius Keser, you have Ein Zelaschcha and Efes Biltecha itself. Now, of course, everything is relative, so it's not a contradiction. So what's the difference? So basically, he says the difference is in how this existence of Eid is. So when it goes into the market, does it exist with the market? Or even with the market, it also doesn't exist. I'll read it because it's very geschmack. So he says like this. Without you, without Etzem, without God, without the divine source, there's nothing at all. Midir is Faranazach in Yiddish. With you, there is something. So therefore, it's not ultimate bittul. You know? Like remember, if we said before about Shagar B'tira, what would we say? The flame does not exist. It's just it has no value. Value. It exists. As a matter of fact, it darkens the spot. It exists. It just has no value in presence of the sun. Like the chacham, the smaller chacham, in presence of a greater chacham. Not as he did become Eish chacham. So he exists. So basically, here with you, there is something. The lower level of Eir is when it's revealed without atzmus, it has no mitzias at all. So the Eir actually feels that without atzmus it has nothing. But that's why it's restless. Remember we said it doesn't feel comfortable outside. Because it doesn't feel, it doesn't have any mitzias of its own. But with atzmus it has some value. It has something. It has a mitzias.
That's counterintuitive. You would think outside it would have some mitzias and inside it wouldn't. And he was telling us the opposite.
What are you saying that? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, ima atzmus mitzias.
Ima atzmus not means in atzmus. It means with one atzmus gives it validation. Then it exists.
Thanks to.
It's not about in atzmus.
Thanks to Oxford.
Right, exactly.
Once he's here, he's here.
In other words, right. So Eir on its own doesn't feel comfortable because outside of the market, Eir on its own is
irritable discontent.
It senses that it's nothing without atzmus. So therefore, it wants to go back to its source. Think of it this way. Think like this. Imagine, just a purely, a mind game here, like a mind exercise, an imaginary exercise. Here's the source of energy. Tells the energy you have to go somewhere outside of me. Energy does not feel at all comfortable. Doesn't understand such a thing. It doesn't have any independent reality. Reality is part of the essence. But it goes, for whatever reason, the next chapter is going to talk about that it goes. But as long as it's outside, it feels completely insecure, it's restless. Like you said, Ayin Beis yashus. That's why it flickers. That's why it's constantly rising. It's not comfortable it's sitting there. It's always on the move, wanting to go back to its source. Okay, so that's a very profound bittul. But does that mean that Eir doesn't exist? Or does that mean that Eir doesn't exist without its source? Obviously, it's the second one. So without its source. But with its source, Eir is very comfortable. In the source, it exists. It's a mitzias. So that's the lower level. I'm talking about now. We ended up saying there's really 5 levels of bittul at the end of the day. There's bina, chachma, 2 in Chitzenius Keser.
Or in 2 in Erakol Batzmusa.
And 1 in Pnimius Keser. Not 2 in Erakol.
Well,
no.
it ends up being Erakol Batzmusa.
2 in Chitzenius Keser. Because he explains Yesh Lema that there's 2 levels of Ein Zeloska, Nefesh Bultecha is in also is in Ukam Gufa. This is what he's saying right here. Okay. And then he goes on, he says, this is like Dasel Shamitzius Sadak Mashem Sefer Nois Mokim Mitzius. But F is Bultecha, who shagam ima atzmus ein shum mitzias klal. This is atzmi. So now we're talking about like these 2 more subtle levels. This is an union of atzmi. That's not just that the air is not b'yashvus. It's not just the energy, the light is restless and not comfortable because it wants to be in the source. But even with atzmus ein shum mitzias klal. V'zel ba'er hakol b'atzmus she'ein b'chinas mitzias air klal. That's Erkol generally, that he said earlier. But then he says, well, derech zeh will be inyan al b'beis madrega shebekesed the chitzenis hakesed sibis haliyah yiskal shum pnei she'en le'mokum klal b'fnei atzmei. In the outer level of kesed, the cause and the reason for the aliyah is because he doesn't have any, he doesn't sense any, doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't feel there's any space of his own. Because kanal she'en le'yisyashus b'fnei atzmei. He's not at peace. But with Atzmus, which means when he does ascend and become included, encompassed in Atzmus, and all this, remember, is the desire to be, not the actual being. Remember, you say from Amdin, it's the Dachshund to be, it's not actually. He's a Metzias even with that.
If he's in Atzmos, that's like
because he's there because he has nowhere else to go.
okay, so he's in Atzmos.
Big difference if I'm there because I have nowhere else to go. I'm there because I belong there.
He's gone.
I wouldn't put it exactly like that.
Why
That's a
not?
nice
He's
way,
there,
but
he's
it's
not
not
there.
there. No, maybe that's an additional explanation.
Once he's there, he's not there.
The basic explanation. One second. Let me just finish reading inside. One second. With this, he finds a place for himself. In other words, on the contrary, he's more there than he is outside. Because you see, air by its nature is not an independent reality. Its reality is its source. As a matter of fact, it's unnatural. It's an anomaly for air to be outside of its source. Not like a yesh. Yesh is the opposite. When a yesh is inside the source, it's annihilated. When a yesh is on its own, it feels all powerful. Ayin by nature, air by nature is a personality that anything outside of its source it feels that doesn't belong. So therefore, it continues consistently has that desire to return to the source, and when it's there, then it does feel it has a place, and that's its place. It's a mitzias.
But it's there while it's
a mitzias because now it's where it belongs.
Here it says while it's thinking, not while it's there mamish.
Yeah, because it's more subtle. But it's the desire of being there that is the critical component. Because it's at the end of the day, it's not mamish there as physically, in a sense.
This is a beautiful.
1 second, hold on. So what's the problem with that? Remember, the mitzias of Eid is not yesh; it's mitzias. We're not talking about that Eid inside the source suddenly becomes an ego. Its ego is egolessness, but its egolessness is its mitzias. That's the distinguish between mitzias and yesh. Understand?
The question.
Hold on. Then there's the level. 1 second. Let me just finish the point. In truth is we always talk. We take it so for granted. We always talk that the real bittul is to listen to the Rebbe and go away from the Rebbe, and that's where the real etzem is there. But that's first of all for a yesh. That's where it is. But for air is not. Air does not feel. It belongs outside of the source at all. Its place is the source.
Yeah, but
that's its mitzias.
But he's still out of the mitzias.
Mitzias, but nicht yesh. What's that? The sibas haliyah. So let's go back. What's the sibas haliyah? She'ein le'mokum ba'atzmei li'ez b'fnei atzmei. The reason it's going is because it has no space, no mokum ba'atzmei. It has no sense of presence of its own to be separate. He goes back because it's all b'tzadat. The whole reason for it is because it's connected. But you see, but it's wrong what you're saying. A yesh would say that. A yesh would say, my interest, my self-interest dictates.
also say that.
A yesh is the self-interest of a yesh is to go, is nowhere else to go. I don't want to. I use an example, but like sometimes people say they became Bal Tshuva or Yiddishkeit, because they had nowhere else to go. And what they had there was terrible. And this was a home and nurturing. It's a whole different thing than when you migrate, when you have plenty of places to go and you still go there. So I wouldn't say that there's nowhere else to go. You're putting it the wrong way because it's not the point. The point is it doesn't belong where it is. It's not, it has nowhere else to go. All it is its source. It's not like it has. There's no option altogether. In other words, it's exact opposite. With a yesh, it's chol metzius, it's outside of its source, and eir is chol metzius inside of its source. So for eir, it's an anomaly to be away from its source. For yesh, the source is the. Look, I'm not saying you can't apply what you're saying on a deeper level, but you know.
By the way, your question should be more on the opposite. Once it's in there, what makes it oil? That should be the question. If you're there, so what makes it oil?
By the way,
that's the hard thing.
By the way, I just remind myself.
It's like you drop it's like your finger gets cut off and it wants to come back to itself, and then it comes back. It finally gets back to itself. That's what it is.
That I don't get.
Okay. So by Yuvenzel, that of Dugma Masrafim Shechavtzim v'Chevtzim v'Tzeim Lichel b'Tzolz u'Bezehem Meravim Tzimayinam. Okay, like he spoke earlier. This is the example, the Srafim, those angels, Srafim. They burn up with desire because they want to be encompassed in the source, and with that they quench their thirst. That's their entire desire is to want to be encompassed in the source. That's the two iskalus. You see, this is the Rebbe sees this piece right here as the mind.
And what's the second level?
One second, he's going to say in a minute. Through iskalus, they quench their desire, but there's their thirst. But their thirst is there, and now it's quenched. So they're in befeir Hashem mitzias. The mitzias of a quenched desire. One second. And that's also in the lower level here, that the air, when it goes up, when it elevates, ascends, and it's encompassed, now it has. Before it's thirsty and feels that it doesn't have a presence, and now it has its presence.
But it says.
Pnimius is mamish iskalus in its source canal. Bittul mamish bittul atzmi. That's the atzmi. It's a bittul atzmi. It's not, and he says, "V'hainu shali eina mitzad she'en le'mapim." Its ascending is not because it doesn't have a place for itself. Kim hu b'inyan atzmi. It's the air itself, the etzem, is one with the source. Now, this is a very subtle.
There, it's about being.
Not wanting to be.
Not wanting, it's about being.
It's very subtle. It
That's
starts
the
out, Ukum has two dark.
What's up? Bittul zel b'chinas iskalos mamish, and this bittul is complete iskalos, is complete iskalos, but the other one is not iskalos mamish. V'zeu inyan efes biltecha. This is efes biltecha, the higher level. Sheyesh shelo yeshum mitzias klal daka atzmus. Even with atzmus, there's no mitzias. But nimtz the base in Yonas Carlson, the base up to the big is the Ayin Beis. Now the interesting thing is, one second, I want to say a few things. First of all, he began by saying that these two are in Ukam. And then when he ends, it sounds like he's going back to Primis HaKesed and Chetzeni HaKesed. And I actually said that. I said Chetzeni HaKesed. So let's see if I can figure that out. Let me see if the Keter helps. 1 second. Yeah, for sure that's two in Ukam. Look at the Keter. Look at the word. The Ukam hu sheretz l'chol yesh b'zeh beis madreges also. It's two levels in Ukam. You have to say, even though he doesn't spell it out, he Primis HaKesed here is Primis HaKesed within Chetzeni HaKesed. He's basically, let's put it this way. You want to say, you could say like this, that Ukam also has the Primis HaKesed thing that he spoke before. That's what he's saying here, for sure.
So but this Rav says him Ravim Simayim. They actually do it with Poyal, right? There's no Metzias in the Atzmas anymore.
I kept explaining there is a Metzias because that's what they want. That's exactly what, that's their entity.
So while they're Chutz Mina Metzias, while they're outside.
Listen, I don't go around circles. You keep asking me the same thing, I keep answering the same thing. So something's missing here. Okay?
That's what I'm going to put my finger on.
Okay. So why don't you maybe Don't process. Listen, I'll try to explain a little more. The question really is here, what's really the difference between the two? They both desire to go into the source. They both have nothing of their own.
Atzmi also desires to go into the source.
Well, both is aliv iskalos into the source. This guy is calling iskalos in the source.
One has no siba though. One is the siba.
Okay, so that's the thing. But what is the ultimately difference? No, the key line that he says is that this one with atzmus is a metzius, this one with atzmus is not a metzius. Right. That's the key difference. In Tanya Shayach Damuna, he says in Perek Gimel that when he talks about the bittul of the world, that if we that if we were given permission to see, existence couldn't be. And he gives the mashal of the light. If the sunlight is outside of the sun, Kolshkin for sure it's inside the sun. But there it completely doesn't exist because it's completely obliterated in the source. That's what he says there. And the same thing, but there he speaks about the yesh, remember, that's not it. There's the yesh of the Welt is even that way. So that's a whole other discussion. But clearly that there's two ways to understand what the air, when the air is inside its source, what that means. I think the best way to explain it would be, remember at the end of the day, let's go back to the reason, why is there light outside the source? If light doesn't belong outside, what's it doing there? The answer is, definitely the Kavanah Aliyena, is because the purpose of existence is not to stay in the source. God wants the Kav to enter existence and not remain Lifnei Atzimtzum. So there's a reason. You're going to learn that in the next chapter, in chapter 283. That the neshama does have to come down the guf and nefesh habamis.
Marching orders.
Yeah, right, marching orders. So the al korcha chatachai, the Eid is told, even though you're not going to feel comfortable there, you're going to feel restless, you're always going to want to return to me, that's where you have to go. Okay, he doesn't say that here exactly, but that's the question, the havana of it. So now let's talk about before the Eid actually leaves on its shlichus, so to speak. So while inside the Moir, in its source, you don't have to say the Eid doesn't exist. There's a communication, so to speak, between the Moir and the Eid. The source is telling you that this energy, you're an energy, you're part of me, you're one here with me, and now I'm preparing you that you're going to be leaving here. And when you leave, you're going to constantly want to come back. And when you want to, it's just as if you are, like he says, but like the Surafim, Emdim Amal. So so both the energy before it leaves the source in this context and after, and when it desires to go back, it's absolutely a mitzvah. It has a role to play, and in that sense, you could say it's even teifus makom. Not teifus makom like the yesh that it never deceives itself into thinking it has no source, and that I'm self-made, self-contained. It's always a source, but I have a role to play, so to speak. Again, I'm explaining this. It doesn't say this, but I have a role to play. So I have a role to play while I'm in the source. I have a role to play while I'm outside the source, and I have a role to play when I desire to go back. That's my role. It's also part of my role is to desire. And I'm afraid of Shemitzias. Not a yesh, a Mitzias.
That shouldn't be there.
So even with Atzmus, therefore, 1 second. Yeah, exactly. By the way, that says that the Fedish
shouldn't get too comfortable. That's upset.
Absolutely, by the way. That's the whole point. The whole point is, you go, I don't want to talk about because remember, ultimately, the yesh also shouldn't get too comfortable. Let's talk about air for a moment. If you find me a shliach that's pure air, we'll talk. I don't know. Now, shliach is not meant to be air. Shliach is supposed to be about davar lifnei atzmei. Remember, it's supposed to be a yesh. A yesh, that's bittul. We're not talking about a yesh now. Stick to the air.
Is it gvul, by the way?
It depends if it's air gvul or air gvul.
No, if it's in.
Yeah, it could be. Remember, in atzmus is neisa hakel. Remember, he spoke. Atzmus contains everything. Gvul doesn't. For a practical purpose, our discussion really doesn't matter. Eir ha-bligvul in some places senses more the bligvul of Atzmus, and Eir ha-gvul senses more the ein harech of Atzmus. We said before about Keter and Chachmah. But that's not relevant. Right now, the bottom line is, so can you say with this, what we just discussed, can you say that Eir doesn't, with Atzmus, befedish there's Eir. Without Atzmus, there's no Eir altogether. And even when the air is outside of the source, does not feel it has a space. So when it goes back to the source, or desires to go back, you can't call it efes biltecha completely. It has to, it's ein zuloscha. That's the bottom line. Because with the source is there. Now, the second level is a whole different story altogether. That's why he began this chapter. He says, remember, Keter feels that it's in lebe'erech mites. Chochma feels that it's, I understand this is not chochma here, but al derech zeh. According to the second deeper dimension, has nothing to do with what it desires, doesn't desire. What do you mean? Let's go now another level. Does Atzmus really need me? For example, do I? So the second level, however, if you this continuing dialogue between Eir and Moyer, okay, and if the Eir asked the question, or somebody that made an interview there and asked like this, okay, now this Atzmus, let's talk about Atzmus a moment. This Atzmus that is sending the Eir out, and according to that, the Eir has a task and a mitzvahs, and so on. Does this Atzmus, is that all it is? The Atzmus is the source of this light, and it wants the light to go outside of itself to the world and do whatever it has to do. The answer is no. You want to talk about me, Atzmus? I am I'm not even a source to light. And even if you want to talk to the real personality of Atzmus is not a source of Eir. So in that sense, you want to really put it in different words. Eir should really be restless even inside its source. Doesn't have a place there also. Because compared to this dimension of Atzmus, what are you doing here?
Who needs it?
Right. There's no need for you. So in that sense, even with Atzmus, there's no Eir, there's no mitzvahs there. So you're talking about not, God forbid, a different level of Atzmus. You're talking about a little level of the herigish of the Eir in Atzmus. That's the difference. So the lower level of Eir here, or this lower level, feels its mitzvahs, and therefore feels it has no rest. It's restless, and wants to be part of it, wants to go to the source. And there it's a mitzvah. There it's at peace. It's quenched its thirst. The atzmi, when he says Eir is etz and bottle, meaning it has nothing to do with the reason for it elevating. Has nothing to do with it going into the source and being at peace. That it feels that Atzmus is completely something else, and therefore even with it I don't exist.
So what makes it Eir?
That has the ability to feel that.
Doesn't feel that. He doesn't feel it. He is.
Atzmus,
The minute he feels, it's not it.
but remember, Eir is not Atzmus.
That's my question. What makes it Eir?
That there's something that carries built that type of bittul into existence.
Then it's Giluyim. It's not.
No. It's called Eir Kodem Kugad Musa in other places. No. It's Mitzias built in Mitzias Nimtza as it manifests in Mitzias. That's the bridge between. 1 second. No. Wait 1 second.
Okay.
Remember, all levels of Eir are one. All Eir. It's not three. 3 levels of Eir, but it's 3 levels of climbing. The point is, if you climb from the Yesh to the lowest level of Bittul, to the next level, to the next, you can come to ultimately relate to that even as you exist, your existence is worthless, even with Atzmus. It's that sense. The ability to sense that. Now, that's true. Yeah, at the end of the day, there's a level of Eir Kodem Kugad Musa that Tzemach Tzedek calls it Yechelis. Here he called it, this you're talking now, this is in Samach Vav, and also here some places. This peri that we learned that I think is one of the key, Reish Ayin Vav, 276. Atzmus is Nishdas and Nishdas. Who feels that? Understand? You see, Yesh senses that the fact that we have a Yesh and Tzusim Atzmusei, that we have no source, tells us that God has no source. So the Yesh, but Eir senses a certain type of Ein Arech because it's so bottled. It senses it. Now, I agree, the word to say it senses means the raise is an it. But the fact of the matter is, he is calling it Eir, Pnimis HaKeser. So it's a level.
Yeah, I'm just asking what makes it Eir.
Makes it Eir is that it's not Atzmus. It's like we say Eir Ein Sof, but Tchila Yeshle. Ein Safe, it reflects Atzmus, it feels Atzmus, it's part of Atzmus, it becomes one with it. Because it's completely bittul. Remember, we said bittul vet.
He wants to know the difference between Eir and Yesh, basically.
No. He wants to know the difference between Eir and Atzmus.
Right. If you're saying that Eir is it, so what makes it Eir?
No. I'll tell you what it really ultimately comes down to. It comes down to is like this. Think of this: if there was only Atzmus and that was it, obviously we wouldn't be here to talk about it. And let's put it this way: there'd be no mitzias nimtza that can experience built mitzias nimtza. Eir, interestingly, has the ability to take a mitzias nimtza to experience built mitzias nimtza. That's the way I would put it. I mean, let me explain it, but you get what I'm saying. That's what Eir is. That's what makes it Eir and not Atzmus. It's. In other words, at the end of the day, he says in some places later, we learned it earlier, Eir is closer to us than it is to Atzmus. With all the Eir's bittul, it's close. It's still mitzias nimtza. That's the key thing. But it's mitzias nimtza is so not about itself. It's as close as to Atzmus as possible, but it's still not. Chassidus uses the expression kod kilu kod mo'aheder. In other words, the echelus of Atzmus, the possibility, the potential of Atzmus to express himself in a mitzias, is always there in Atzmus, but it's still not Atzmus. It's only Atzmus manifesting. So you're really asking me how the question is how that manifestation takes place.
Can you say that Eir is the mitzias nimtza of the built mitzias nimtza?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
You could
the
say
word.
that. Exactly. It is.
So if you understand what does it mean mitzias nimtza, built mitzias nimtza,
Yeah.
then you can understand what
Let's
does
put
it
it
mean.
this way. No. The question you could ask is even more. Most people think built mitzias nimtza contradicts mitzias nimtza, but built mitzias nimtza is so not defined. It doesn't even it does not contradict mitzias nimtza either. You understand? Mitzias nimtza means basically a thing exists as it exists. It's built in mitzias nimtza means you cannot call it that it exists, but you can't say it doesn't exist. So you're saying it doesn't not exist. It's the only way to define it. It's the real ultimate quantum reality. You understand? But the thing there is in quantum reality, doctor, and this is, the Atzmus is both quantum and not quantum. That's the thing. It's even beyond quantum. It's not defined by being undefined. It can take a lack of that's where physicists have not reached. They can't bridge the undefined state of the quantum with the defined state of our reality, our macrocosmic reality. And Atzmus could bridge the two because he's not defined by being undefined. He could take the lack of definition, and that too can become definition. That's basically chapter Reish Ayin Vov. And that's what Eir does. Only Eir can do that, because without bittul, see, if Yesh did that, it'd be a big problem, because then there's a disconnect. Eir can do it because it's so bittul. In other words, let's put it this way. Think of somebody that's completely bottled to the Rebbe. Completely. I'm not saying you'll ever find someone, but absolutely. He's not the Rebbe. But he will get and be able to express things of the Rebbe's that no one else can. Not because he's a Metzias, because he's so not, he becomes a transparent channel. Whatever the Rebbe says, whatever the Rebbe wants to express, he expresses. Even things that are completely not shaykh to him. Beyond his seichel, beyond his midas. That's the real nature of Eir. See, that's the reason we have difficulty with most of this is because we don't relate to the properties of something that's not a Metzias or a Yesh. We don't relate to it. So learning about Eir is really learning about what we're not. We're not like this. Even when a person is a Chassidus Shahid, let's say, he has pleasure from being a Chassidus Shahid. So I don't mean negative pleasure. This is what he wants. The Eir doesn't want to be on its own. But the Eir that's able to feel that it's so nothing, we can't relate to. That's why you keep asking, is it a Metzias? I understand. It's not a Metzias, but remember, for Eir, that's not a problem. So the bittul of Eir is what allows it to be able to become a channel even built in Metzias Nimtza. How that works exactly, it's basically kodim. The language is kodim kikad museh. It's a very strong. The Rebbe Rashab says in Samach Vav these words: "Ubezeh chidush Rabbeinu nishmasei." This is like the chidush, of the ultimate chidush of the Alter Rebbe that you can carry built in Metzias Nimtza because of bittul into Metzias Nimtza through Eir.
The question is, those Mekubolim that didn't understand it through Eir, could they understand Metzias built in Metzias Nimtza? No.
But they could only understand it. No, one second.
The Rambam, for example, talks about Metzias built in Metzias Nimtza, but doesn't talk about Eir.
Yeah, you know something? Let's put it this way: they had understanding, but they came to a place where they got stuck.
Right.
They got stuck.
And that is up to care of that.
And the Alter Rebbe took care of it even more.
With what?
Eir. With Eir.
No, Eir is a Rizal, not an Alter Rebbe.
No, that is a Chiddush Alter Rebbe, not a Rizal. No, he uses the word Eir, but the understanding of Eir as Kodim Kikad is the Alter Rebbe. That's clear Alter Rebbe. No, listen, it's all steps. The Rizal establishes Keter, Tzimtzum, and it's all miyusid. You can see the foundation. Now, I'll tell you what the bottom line is. They all get stuck, like it says in Vayelech. They get stuck. Either you have to let go of Atzmus because you really can't get there, or you go to Atzmus, you have to let go of yourself. They don't have something that's a real bridge between non-existential and existential. And that's...
But it's actually both.
Yeah. So Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe goes, but his Chiddush is, why do Mekabalim use Eir? They themselves never explain why they use Eir. He explains it better than they do, in a way. So they use the word Eir, but they don't never go to the level of Eir Kaddim Kadmuse. Kaddim Kadmuse means it is as, what does Kaddim would mean? When you say the Eibush is the Kadmon, is the only thing that's Kaddim, is the only thing that is has no beginning. So everything has a beginning. To say that Eir should be Kaddim Kadmuse has no beginning like Atzmus is only possible because it's not a Metzias. So what you're asking really is, how could a Metzias be not a Metzias? That's what you're asking. Well, you should have a few discussions with Eir and it'll tell you. That's what Eir does. But let's put it this way. We could relate to it, at least in Seichel. I mean, the bottom line, in action is another story, but you do it through process of elimination. I mean, there's no question the climbing of the ladder here of the levels is in order to get, that's why it doesn't just start with that. You can't just go there. You have to first be a little bit like Bina. Then you get the Chochmah, then you get the Keser, then you get to the Pnimius HaKeser. Anyway, I have to say is that there's no question that he is definitely explaining these two things now in Chetzenius HaKeser itself. There's the Pnimius HaKeser. It's very clear that it's that. We have to read it again, but he definitely is adding, it's definitely 5 at the end. There's Pnimius HaKeser. He just doesn't distinguish between Pnimius HaKeser and so-called the higher level of Ukam that he just explained now. The way you read it here, it sounds like in Ukam, in Keser itself, in because you see, that's what's bothering me is this. According to the simple explanation, you'd say it's like this: Keser has 2 parts. One place Ukam, another Reisha de Yada, and there's 2 different levels. One is Efes Bultecha. But the Rebbe Rashab is not satisfied with that. He wants it to be that there's 2 interpretations here. There's that they keep saying that. That means there's one interpretation that's Primis HaKeser and Chetzenius HaKeser. Another in Chetzenius HaKeser is also Primis and Chetzenius.
Because you got to find the interface.
Yeah,
Exactly.
You'll never find
That's
it.
probably the reason.
You'll know he's never find
So why do you keep on coming back for it? You're a masochist.
I enjoy the process.
No.
I enjoy the process.
No, exactly. Because like they say, the process is the destination.
That's it.
You know, right?
Exactly.
No, because let's say one second. You just gave you hit the nail on the head. That's the whole point. As long as you want it, it's your yesh that wants it. The whole point is you'll get the interface as soon as you stop wanting it.
Doctor?
In 180 years.
Let go, doctor, let go.
No, he's letting go. That's why he's here. I absolutely agree. By the way, I think that I mean, it doesn't say. There's no doubt in my mind that this whole process is not about the detective work. I'm going to find it somewhere. The process itself allows you to come to the interface because you're allowing yourself to be overtaken by it. As long as you think I'm an outsider, and just tell me where the interface with divine, where heaven kisses earth, and I'll go there, and then I'll come back home. It doesn't work that way. You have to become something different for you to go there. You're not going there. It's not like a tourist attraction. Here's where heaven and earth meet. That's a critical component. I think there's no question and I think that's what Chochmah has the power to do. It can take you for a trip to a place you don't belong on your own. By the envisioning, the visualizing, the whole everything. He talked about the vision and sight and sound. By hearing and learning things and seeing things that are not your own reality, allows you to begin to relate to it, assimilate it, dream about it, and that turns you into a more refined entity that can become a container for it at the end of the day. There's no question that's the process here. I mean, to me, the truth is the answer was answered. As soon as the Chachma Stima, that's the answer. Chachma is a place where they can meet. Now, I understand. There's always that last thing. Remember, at the end of the day, it's the power of Atzmos that brings them together. So what do you need all these levels for? The answer is, but that's an Atzmos power. It's not us. These levels are for us to relate to it. That's the whole point. So we could relate. I mean, at the end of the day, can you assimilate it all? I mean, I guess it's so many levels here. Because remember, you're dealing with here the ultimate joining of harmony and diversity. No one's trying to eliminate diversity. You're still going to be you, and I'm going to be me. Even when Molar is Deus Hashem and Mashiach is here and all that, we're still going to be we'll be distinct entities. At the same time, we'll be completely fused as one without self-interest hurting each other. Can you really visualize that? You can visualize. You have moments like that when you have a good Chassidish Rabbein, and you have a place where people's egos don't clash, where there's real cooperation. Those moments you have that, and I don't mean being lifted like by a Rebbe's Rabbein, where everybody for a moment like Shagir V'Tira, everybody for a moment or for a few moments, and then they go out, they're back to the same war again. We're talking about actually being refined to a point where you really sit together and so on. I mean, that's how I always understood when the Rebbe said, I did everything, and now it's up to you. Let's be practical. How the Rebbe could not stop us from fighting with each other, even with his presence here. I'm not saying that was what the Rebbe was talking about fighting, but I mean to say, I'm speaking in a very, grubber way. That he cannot do for us. You want to be Kalim for Mashiach, you have to do something. I cannot just lift you on my shoulders, and everybody will be beautiful by 4 hours of Fabrengen or whatever, Simchas Torah and so on. There has to be something you do. Now, we would have liked the deal to be not that way. That, we stay who we are, and the Rebbe lifts us, and the Gili itself changes us. But obviously that was not meant to be like that. And that's what the Rebbe said, That's what we said, Purim Mem Zayin, the Rebbe said, that Ilu Zechinu had been merited, and the Iskashus would have been so intense, so the Nasi could have elevated everybody. That's what he said. Since it's not the case, now it has to go over to you. That's, to be very... that's what we should be fabrengen about if you really want to talk about 18 years.
Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. The whole system of Atmos, it doesn't work that way.
No.
Atmos would have been different.
No. It's a good question. 1 second.
Yeah.
But it's al derech. 1 second. If Adam and Chava not eaten from the tree, the Alter Rebbe writes in Terer that it would have been like the avuka that would have gathered. It would not have been a birur mamat lamayl. It wouldn't have been so internalized. But something, we would give up the internalization from Mashiach. Who cares? So it won't so be so internal. But clearly, that was not,
That's God's intent. He was in the lingo.
Listen, it would have, right? But my point that I'm trying to say is that it's when you look, so you should begin to understand where Metzias meets non-Metzias. That's what it comes down to. Will you fully get it? I don't know if the word get it. You won't get it if you get it the way you're still a grub person before. Obviously, like Moshe Rabbeinu. You want to see me? You're going to have to not look. You stop looking, you'll start seeing. That's what it comes down to. If you look, no one can see me and live. Yeah. Then it's me. Yeah. No, then it's me. It's not you. That's the point. It's not you. You want to be you and see me, you're going to have your Metzias, your Yesh Metzias mixed with some bittul, and we'll get some places. Let's put it this way. The more the bittul, the more you see reality. The only other way to get to reality is through foreign substances. And even then, it's not real. It's not even. It's like some, whatever it is. Other way, bittul is the only way that opens the doors. In some of Vov, he says that the main two things that get to the etzem is bittul and yigiyah. Yigiyah breaks the yesh. It breaks it. Effort, exertion, and bittul opens up your existence to something beyond. So that's it. Master bittul, and you'll have no problems. You'll go right in. If you want to have both, no bittul and get in, you're not going in too far. So that's good. I said by the Fabrengen, I said the Rebbe Rashabe that Sichel Teir Shalom, he says, B'shas meveis mevem mahatzatan hapnanan derech eretz. It's an unbelievable line. He says when you know with who you're dealing with, you have a different respect. When you learn all these things, at the end of the day, you realize what you're dealing with is a lot different than you thought. God is not just this nursery school image, So that's that chapter. Chapter 282 basically goes back now. I'm just summing it up. I'm not going to learn it inside. Here he goes back to that. He's comparing. He's saying these three levels of bittul and eir. Let's just sum them up again. That it is like it's similar to the source. It feels the source, and it wants to be one in the source. We just discussed now being one, the whole different levels of that. Well, those three correspond to the three levels of bittul, of eir, they spoke about in the beginning of the Hemshech, chapter 29. I guess he's tying that together. What are the three things? Chad v'lei b'chushbon. It's one beyond any measurement.
Higher to lower, you're going.
Yeah. Here's from higher to lower, right. The second, that's higher than Kelim altogether. That's like Keter, whatever level in Keter, bottom line. The second Chochmah is how it's higher than in Kelim, higher than it comes down to containers. And Gimel is the way it's inside Kelim. According to above, these three levels of bittul are these three levels. And now he goes on and says that all three are an eir. Even the bittul, even the eir as it's in a keli, also has a sense of the others. That's what he says here. Okay. I will just point out a few things here that may be important for later. He says a line here that then he goes on and says it's like two levels in das. You know, das is sometimes counted under Chochmah and Bina, and sometimes das is right under Keser, right? So he says a line here. He says that the das that's under Keser is like primus Keser. Who hergish b'chinas atzmus shalamayim b'chinas mokel ishtalshlus? How atzmus is higher than the source for source, and there you see it sense that there's nothing. Ein zulascha basically. So he says this main thing is in Chochmah. Avol Bina is already the source of ishtalshlus. So Bina is the lowest level. Chochmah senses it, but then he adds Chochmah is similar to Chetzein Keser, to the second level, similar to the third level. Rak shesham b'chinas aliyah v'iskalus, but in Keser it's aliyah v'iskalus, like he said in chapter 8, like he said in the previous chapter. Makir for ner pnimi. Mitzvah bittul aliyah v'iskalus, and that's ayin mamish. That's the third level. But the bottom line is, what he concludes here is that even this third level in Eir is also there, in some sense, also in Eir Mislabish B'Kelim. Because remember, we're not talking about, it's three levels, but we're still talking about Eir. Everything is still Eir.
And what's it doing in Kalim?
He was told to go there.
Well, he says, Omnam b'chinas ayin u bittul zed b'chinas aliyah v'izkalos yeshnu b'chos ha'eir, gam ba'eir ha'mislabish b'kelim. You see that? The liyah shesibas aliyah b'pnei shadavuk b'mkeirei, because the cause of why is the air going up? Because it's davuk, because it's connected. Al kein hu b'chinas aliyah l'mayla lichel b'mkeirei v'loi liyas l'mad b'chinas davuk la'atzmei. Had a close air b'chinas dveikas b'mkeirei al kein b'chos air gam ba'eir mislabish yesh b'teva aliyah. Even air, remember we said even the air inside the kelim is also teva. Its nature is to go up. It doesn't suddenly become a keli. It's still nature to go up. I'll explain in a minute, but what he's really tying up here is just to explain to you, it's not three mutually exclusive personalities. The difference will be in a second. 1 second. So even the air in the keli, even the lowest level, is also who inyan ha'aliyah commissions bar leil pedicus be'efana aleph b'chinas psik again be'efana aleph.
Highest one.
Yeah, no, efana aleph is the lower one.
What's the big deal? Of course,
well, no.
Of course, it's in Kalim and wants to move in Kalim. We're talking about what we call Makkah.
Yeah. Shebchins ayin yeser mekameshu ba'er mitzadas me'liyesim me'ein ha'etzem. In other words, so this thing that the nature of air to go up into the source is a higher element in air than the air being just a reflection of the source. That's what he's saying. That's the difference. So even the air in the keli wants to go upward. That's why you see the nature of air, even when it's on a wick, is still rising. Okay? The difference is that the air in the source, higher than kelim, is mamish ayin. You can't say it's nothingness, complete mamish nothingness. The mishum zehu b'chinas islapshus. Exactly what you just said. That's what it's doing in kelim, because it's islapshus. L'fianal yashlem. Okay. Did you understand this parenthesis, by the way?
No. Hayetzemanal.
No, l'fianal. L'fianal, he says this too, the interpretation of Tanya Perikutes, that the flame wants to go up, Chochmah. And Lamed Hey, that it feels there's nothing but God, is these two levels. Basically, and the Chochmah itself there's two levels. So you can add a sixth level if you like. Basically saying that there's the two levels of Chochmah itself, in Tanya, just in Perikutes, says that Chochmah is like the Neir of the Neshama. It wants to go upwards. In Perek Lametei it says the Chochmah senses ein hu levade ve'en zulose. there's nothing but. So I think it looks to me, Chetchila, I thought that Perek Keter is higher than Perek Lamed Hey. Because he said Aliyah V'Skalos is higher than that there's nothing but, which is the second. Aliyah V'Skalos is the third level. But here it says Zel L'maylam Mizeh. So it's a little, I'm not clear. There's parentheses. Which one is higher? Perek Keter or Perek Lamed Hey? Yesh L'Ayin Beis. I'm going to have to go look in Tanya to really get it. I'm getting mucket to first thing. But anyway, the point that he's saying here is that, I mean, you have to say that, remember, ultimately all this is L'maylam Mizman. So you're not talking about three types of Eir. One Eir is in a Keli, one Eir is L'maylam Keli, another Eir is this. You're talking about the same Eir goes through has within it three dimensions. That's really what's going on. Even the Eir in a Keli has the highest level. But as it's in the Keli, its primary role is the Slapshus. So, but it still senses its source. In the level that's higher than Kelim, it senses the source, it feels the source. And the third level, the focus is primarily to go into the source. You could basically say that Eir, so therefore Eir has all elements. It goes into the Kelim, but it retains its personality. That's this Perek Reish Pei.
It sums it up.
Hayetzim now, the Eir be'etzim b'chinas ayin. That's the bottom line. Remember, but all these levels, if you show me'ein ha'etzem, yes, be'tev aliyah, and these b'chinas ayin mamish. Okay. I'm going right over. I'm just summarizing. Reish Pei Gimel. Now starts a new, another chapter in this drama. This is the drama of, we could say this is the drama where Eir and Keli meet. So what is this Reish Pei Gimel? And honestly, I read this chapter a few times. I'm a little confused. Maybe some of you can enlighten me here. Both Reish Pei Gimel and Reish Pei Dalet. It's very. He begins by saying, and I'll read it inside. Everything going all right? Okay. Let me even better. It's always good to have summaries. I'm going to read the summary in the beginning of Eschanan. Okay. Yesh la'agdim asher nisbar Eliel. See on page Tov Kuf Ayin Beis 572. So he says like this. Yesh la'agdim asher nisbar Sha'eru b'chinas ayin. Because these summaries are very good. They set the tone for the next Maimer. So it's important to know what the Rebbe Rashab exactly is summarizing. He doesn't say everything. He says certain key points. So bottom line is the few things we must keep in mind that's critical, because especially when you get to Keli, Eir is Ayin, Keli is Yesh. The whole discussion we were just having, don't get lost, it's all understanding that Ayin. And in Ayin there's many levels. But at the end of the day it's Ayin, and then there's this Ayin is going to have to meet its nemesis, its Yesh. I don't know if it's nemesis is the right word, its counterpart. Okay. So Ayin, Eir is Ayin, and that ayin it feels it's similar to the source, it's connected to the source. Let's start with that. It's similar to the source, it feels its source and wants to be one in the source. And all the levels are all part of that. That's ayin. Li is the Eiru b'chinas gili ha'etzem. Eir is the gili of etzem. Remember, ayin means it's not about me, it's about I'm nothing. I am here, I'm a channel to something else. It's gili ha'etzem. Ukashem she'etzem ayin, she'en mitzias dova, just like the etzem is ayin, and doesn't have it's not a mitzvah, kamekin Eir. That was the first level, of course. The gam liya she'eru b'chinas dveikus b'mekere, and also because the Eir is dovuk, is connected to the source. Dveikus b'mekere is connected. It clings, it cleaves to the source. Level 2.
But remember, I was telling you that the second one is dveikus. Even though I agree, he brings dveikus by all three.
I understand.
But happens to be by the second one, he always kvetches dveikus.
Because I guess because also sensing the source. Yeah.
Dveikus brings that.
Yeah.
He can move on. All three have dveikus.
Yeah. Some places he brings dveikus. Some. Yeah. I understand.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. That it's similar to the source, similar to the source, to the essence. That's the general personality of light, energy. Also in the air that's inside the containers. The sense of that there's nothing but him is the air that's higher than the manifest in the kelim. And there's the third thing. The third thing in energy, the nature of air to ascend and to be nichlal and to become encompassed and swallowed up, included in the source, becomes Ayin Beis. Calls it Ayin Beis here, because being that it's even more Ayin within Ayin itself, look who thinks he's nobody.
No,
Basically.
you have Bechina Ayin, you have Ayin and Ayin Mamish.
And now it's Ayin Beis. The Gamzel b'chol seir. But this too, even this third dimension is also in general air. Basically, it's where what's the primary element in each. Explanation is, remember, the nature of air, to want to go into its source.
His nephews in a coma. Everybody should be sure.
Which nephew?
Laser Lazarov.
The name, I'll give you the name. The name.
Laser Lazarov from
I've totally heard
Texas.
Ben Roch.
From California.
From
I've totally heard Ben Roch.
From where? 13.
What happened?
Last night, Friday.
What happened?
I'm
Car accident?
just saying, they just.
I'm in Sinai.
I'm flying.
From Texas?
Yeah.
Detroit, I think.
Yeah. Yeshiva is in the university.
Okay, so the learning is Nishkus.
Naftali?
Hertz Ben Roch.
Naftali has been Rachel. Huh? It was on Mitzvah, Friday afternoon.
So the Teva Zuba Eru Mitzada Devek has been Keri. That's what he added. I should have emphasized that before. The reason all levels of air, even the lowest in the Kalim, is because the Teva comes, here he says the Dvekus comes from Dvekus. Since it's connected to its source, it's not just similar to the source, it's not just senses the source, it also wants to go, even the lowest level. So even the air in the Kalim wants to return to its source because it's Dvekus, it's still connected to its source, it's still Ayin, it's still not about itself. And the fact is that all levels, even the way air it manifests inside of Keter, is also dveikus b'mketer, is also bound to its source. And that's why it has also the nature of aliyah. He's adding this. It at least does not have peace on its own to be alone. That's why a flame flickers and rises, even on its lowest level. See, here's the Beis Yanim, but the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe. In his boy, that's why the summary is so important, because he's saying things here he didn't say an actual mind. In his boy, being the scholars, there's two things in the scholars. In scholars meaning when the area wants to become encompassed inside its source. Well, the first thing is because it doesn't have peace on its own. It's not comfortable to be. It's not a presence of its own. The second is that air is just an inyan atzmi in air that is bottled to the moed. Nothing to do with it being at peace or not being at peace. He added here that he did not add in the previous Maimon. He actually added something. The previous Maimon, in the Maimon, he said that the lowest level of air is similar to the source. The place of Nois Ashfus is in Keter, the two levels. The two levels in Keter, that there's two reasons of his scholars. He compares Ukam and Lo Yada. Here he's saying that this thing that it is not at peace with itself is not just in Keter, it's also in the lowest level of it also. Yeah, that's not Beis Yashvus. So in other words, the bottom line is that this itself is a whole, Dr. Lang and myself, we made a achlota on Chodal Tevis to map out the spiritual human genome, right? We're going to map it all out. Pasha make a map, a digital map, right? And we're going to put these things all on the map, where everything is. And so on.
You're just up there, you have to have so many levels right here.
Fine, no, so you'll expand it. That part will expand.
If you highlight it and expand
Look, they're doing it. Where they're doing it? Who's doing it? In France, they're mapping the human genome. They say another few years they're going to have every DNA, every French physicists.
But they had it.
Yeah. Well, we can begin now. It'll take us a few years. What do you think? We'll map out the whole structure of Tzelem Elikim as it's structured in our existence, with Akiz and Mechis Temo and Metzach and then Naims and Tzachtan. We'll have a human body and dissect it. What's Akstav? And then every place we'll say Maramokim. This Maimon is this. He's giving us a picture. How many people? How often do you get a picture of?